So I thought today I would talk a little bit about an area that we don't talk about too terribly much here, and that is our authority to license. Now, this is an area that I think is more traditionally reserved for cities, but a lot of these statutes are written in ways that includes us too. So we're just going to talk in sort of general terms about this tool that you can potentially use, to deal with issues in your community. Now, one thing that I want to just sort of caution folks about is that the legislature has done their best to hide these statutes kind of all over the place in some deeply random places. So even more so than usual, licensing authority, particularly for townships, is a game of statutory hide and seek. But okay. So in general, just to sort of talk about what we're talking about here, a license is a regulatory device that is designed to ensure compliance with certain rules of regulations. So these things exist on something of a continuum. Anybody who meets the qualifications and makes a proper application, they get it. And at the other end, you can sort of have a much more robust sort of regulatory function on this thing. So dogs on the one hand, and really like problem businesses are on the other is one way that I like to think about this. But in any way, so you're governing specific occupations, professions, trades, and the like. And we are allowed to do this to sort of as a regulatory tool. Now we can charge fees for this thing, but just so you know, this is something that is relatively limited. So there is case law out there limiting our authority over this. So it's not supposed to be a profit center. It's supposed to be there's supposed to be a tight nexus between the amount of regulating that we have to do, how much that actually costs versus what we're charging. So for example, if you're licensing a gas station, you can charge for things like inspections and stuff of that nature, but you can't charge for the extra amount of traffic that your roads are going to get. There's a case about that one. That said, of course, as in all contexts, courts start by presuming our ordinances are constitutional and place the burden on the attacker. And so, we do have a pretty large potential benefit there. Now, as with all township powers, there are both express and implied permissions to license. And this is something that we'll get into once we get into a little bit more detail about the actual licenses or the specific activities that we can do. But in this particular context, the state has really gone through this in a pretty piecemeal way. So sometimes they've specifically prohibited us from regulating certain activities. For example, their Minnesota Statute 18B.02 provisions of this chapter preempt ordinances by local governments that prohibit or regulate any matter relating to the registration, handling, labeling, distribution, sale, use, application, or disposal of pesticides. So they very specifically say you cannot regulate this particular area using this tool. Sometimes they haven't gone quite so explicit about whether or not you can't do it, and they sort of move to what's called occupation in the field. That is, they've sort of regulated this thing so thoroughly that it's clear that the intention was to preempt any sort of local ordinances. Now, the building code used to be a great example of that one, but they actually added in preemption language to it. Pesticide also was one that they used to have. There are a couple of cases out there about it being occupy the field type preemption for local governments, but the legislature has gotten better about being explicit when it's banning us for doing these things. Anyway, so okay. So it's a regulation tool. We can use it to impose certain, restrictions on occupations or businesses or other like sorts of entities. But we have certain preconditions that apply to every license that we can issue in this state. First, we can't issue any of them. We can't renew, can't issue, can't approve if they don't give us proof of proper workers' compensation insurance coverage. And by statute, that means the name of the insurance company, the policy, and the dates of coverage or a permit to self-insure. So that's one thing that if you decide to use one of these tools, you have to make sure that you're asking about that. Minnesota Statute 176.182. Another big one is taxes. So we are not supposed to issue or renew a license if somebody is delinquent on their state level taxes. Delinquent means more than $500, so it's not like just it's not trivial amounts of money. But if the Commissioner of Revenue notifies us, that's the word the statute uses, then we're not supposed to issue licenses for folks to do business. Now, there are, as with every other thing, it's possible for us to screw this up. Now, there are constitutional limits on this, both as a federal and state matter, but our terms must be reasonable, can't place unnecessary or oppressive restrictions on somebody's ability to do business. And of course, we can't contradict either the federal or state constitutions. So the big ways that jurisdictions get into trouble for this, and usually it's cities. If you go through the case law, it's usually cities. They try to exercise this power quite a bit more, I think. But it's acting arbitrarily or capriciously. You can't just decide that you don't like somebody and you're not going to give them a license because you don't like them. Discriminating between different classes of applicants, you got to make sure that you have a reason that you're treating different classes of applicants differently. And then summary denials, that's another big one that we can get into trouble with, because these are, frankly, it's a pretty devastating thing to lose a license if you can't do business in a particular place. So you have to be very careful to explain our reasoning if we are in this neighborhood. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, there is just no complete list of authorities for this thing. Like we've got a relatively thorough workup on the information library, but there is no unifying principle that the legislature has used to say, oh yeah, this is how we're going to allow you to license these sorts of businesses and not those sorts of businesses. They're really just done it on a case by case kind of piecemeal basis. And one of the more annoying things is they've hidden this in lots of different chapters that we wouldn't normally look at. So I'm just going to give you an example of how annoying this can get. So if you're being a diligent township officer and you are taking a look at, for example, 368.01, subdivision 11 specifically says the town board may by ordinance restrain or license and regulate auctioneers, transient merchants, dealers, hawkers, peddlers, solicitors, canvassers. That seems pretty clear. I would feel relatively comfortable reading through that thing that, okay, that is a direct grant of authority for us with respect to auctioneers, but it turns out that's misleading because hiding out there in Minnesota Statute 330.025, there's the auctioneers have their own statute which says, haha, not really. It's like you actually don't get to regulate those things. So the language there is notwithstanding 368.01, a town may not require a person licensed as an auctioneer by a county and bonded under this chapter to obtain an additional license. So there's a lot of room for this stuff to sort of ambush you, as it were. So, as with anything, please feel free to give us a call, but you really do have to look through both the township power statutes, the municipal power statutes, and then look at the actual activity that you're potentially thinking about regulating, because they hide these exceptions sort of all over the place. But nevertheless, this is a tool that you can use in your toolkit, and particularly, I think one of the things that is attractive about it is it's a lot less potentially problematic in terms of the amount of work that you have to do than a full zoning ordinance. So this is something that you can do to control potential problem entities, potential problem businesses, without having to go through that full, putting yourself in the ambit of 15.99, that 60-day rule, and all that kind of good stuff. Okay. So now I'll just sort of start talking about some of the major activities that we can license, or the major sort of things that we can license. I talked about this in terms of activities, and that's true. Usually licensing is with respect to a profession, occupation, something like that. But animal licenses are also a thing. And these are probably, honestly, this subject is kind of why I wanted to dive into it, because it's just so silly. Um, it's one of the more bizarre areas of township law, and our licensing authority depends on what kind of animal it is, where it is, and what it's doing. So I actually created this little chart here, for folks if you want to take a look at this. But they have divided up who has the authority to license animals in townships, depending on the kind of animal it is and where it is. So horses, cattle, sheep, and swine that are going loose on roads. So this is one of the weird areas where the electors at the annual meeting kind of get to, it actually says they get to pass bylaws themselves on that. Now, in practice, of course, the enforcement of that is going to be a board power. So the voters, it's not a thing that the voters really can do by themselves, but they can get a lot farther than you can in other contexts. But for example, dogs or other domestic pets in the platted residential areas, the town board can do that by themselves. But if it's anywhere other than the platted residential areas, the electors need to authorize it. So if you want to take a look, if you want this, I'd be happy to send it to you. But I just think that's kind of entertaining. This one I think is probably more practical. So town boards may by ordinance license and regulate the keeping of billiard, pool, pigeonhole tables, games of amusement, games of skill, jukeboxes, roller skating rinks, bowling alleys, circuses, shows, and theatrical performances. So, I think a lot of folks on this call are aware a couple of years back of the tragic case where there was a child pretty seriously hurt by a sort of sideshow type amusement in the township. If you are worried about that, this licensing power might be a good thing to take a look at. We've got some fairly expansive opinions from the Attorney General's office telling us that, stock car races count as shows, rodeos count as shows. Basically, anything that's in that neighborhood is probably something that we can regulate. So in particular, if you're worried about this and you don't have a zoning ordinance, I think this is potentially a good tool to take a look at and consider passing. Just in case folks were curious, this is a pigeonhole table, apparently. Apparently it's an early form of pinball, but we get to regulate those. Cigarettes. This is one that I think is a little unusual. I think folks used to do this a fair amount, but it seems like it's been declining over the years, partially because this specific set of activities has the statute that gives us that power sort of creates a bunch of obligations for us. So this one's a little bit less practical, perhaps, than some others. But this one is out there if you're worried about sort of tobacco and tobacco-related devices. And you also can do vapes now too, electronic devices. This is probably my favorite weird one that I was able to find. We have the authority to regulate tear gas vendors. So very specifically, towns are included in the licensure powers with respect to this. It's also stun guns. So stun guns and tear gas, we can license those things within our towns. I don't know that there are a whole lot of vendors, frankly, in the state of Minnesota in general, but just so you know, I found that one kind of entertaining. But we have a lot more sort of practical stuff. So boards of health, that's potentially a big one. Solid waste, that's potentially a big one. But we've got a fairly large list of things in the information library if you want to do a little bit more digging yourself there. But we also have a fairly long list of stuff that we specifically can't regulate. So auctioneers we talked about earlier, but snowmobiles, watercraft, camping areas, manufactured homes. They really just sort of walk through and kind of, it seems like as a problem would come up, they would just sort of create these ad hoc little regulations with respect to local governments, with respect to, oh, I'm sorry, when did I freeze up there? You have to license every business in our township, home businesses, storage places, are in charge of these. You do not have to license anybody. You don't have to use this power at all. It's a tool in the toolkit that you can use if you want to. And in particular, I think if you're the reason that I'm bringing this up is because one, we don't talk about it enough as sort of a tool in the toolkit. But two, if you're dealing with, if you've got a problem business specifically, but you don't want to go all the way through a zoning ordinance, I think this is the good middle step. I think it is a lot easier to administer. I think it's a lot easier to handle. And I think that you also are perfectly okay to regulate the stuff you're mad about and not regulate the other stuff. So I think it's a much freer tool. I think it's a sort of thing that you could consider if you find yourself in that situation. So. Your attention, please feel free to give me a question if you've got any. Otherwise, I will see you next month. Now, before I leave, there is one thing that I should bring up with folks. So MnDOT has, I believe I've mentioned this on calls in the past, MnDOT has reached out to us and told us that the Town Bridge Fund is already expended for the year 2025. So that is, it's 9 months without any additional bridge funding from the state. Now we are getting some interest in potentially fixing that from the legislature. So we've had some luck with Senator Dibble recently on that. So if everybody on this call would feel would be willing to, write a letter to their senator or their state rep, or just give them a buzz, shoot them an email saying, hey, look, this is a big deal. Please support fixing this. I think that could potentially be helpful. Now my crystal ball is very cracked, so God knows what it is that they're going to do. Thank you. But just poke them one more time, give them a call, whatever. I mean, if you've already done it, you've done your duty. So I appreciate that. But in any event, so we've got Leslie has thrown up the take action link. So go ahead and click on that if you're willing. Otherwise, thanks, and I hope you guys have a good morning.
Thank you, Graham. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Graham.